Australia, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, welcome back, dear listener. The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove, a podcast, episode 380. Fingers crossed that all technical issues are resolved and hopefully the podcast goes without a hitch. Joe, can you hear me out there, Joe? No, Joe just disappeared.
Oh,
Yes, you there, Joe?
yeah. Sorry, I was trying to type, and it took keyboard shortcuts to turn off my video.
Okay, you had me really worried there. So, yeah. Because, dear listener, I am ensconced in a room at
Your noise
Coolangatta.
cancelling is not very active at the moment.
No, it's not. And I've got some grandkids running around. I don't have my normal setup at home. I don't have my marvelous noise gate that keeps out the noise. But I'm about to crack the whip and demand silence in this unit so that I can do my podcast. Anyway, I think they'll settle down because it's 7:30 and they'll get into bed soon. And we'll talk about news and politics and sex and religion the way we normally do. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. With me sometimes, Joe, the tech guy.
Yes,
How
most
are
of the time.
Yeah. Joe, you were gallivanting around Southeast Queensland, entertaining an overseas guest. And you're at Australia Zoo.
Meerkats. Yes.
Yeah. Did you feel an affinity for them when you saw the meerkats at Australia Zoo?
They had zero interest in us. All they were interested in was the food, and we were very good climbing frames for them to get closer to the food.
Excellent. Good. Glad you had a good time. Scott is on the way back from Hong Kong, or maybe he's back and he's just collapsed in his room and recovering. And yeah, I'm in a unit at Coolangatta, and so we're in a bit of a holiday mood. I think we'll start this podcast with a bit more sort of relaxed, not so serious type of stories, just because it is a bit of that holiday time, school holidays, Easter holidays. I'll tell you one story, Joe. So I'm here at Coolangatta, and hello in the chat room to Alison James. So I'm at Coolangatta, and we've been here a lot, and it's my mother's old unit, and we'd see these people who would go for a swim. They'd walk out onto the beach as a group and swim from Greenmount to Coolangatta. And I thought, you know what? Now I'm going to be here more regularly. I should do this ocean swim. So I knew they gathered at 8 o'clock. And so I just sort of wandered over into the group and said, I'm a newbie. And they welcomed me and said, put your gear here and we'll head down. And then this guy says, yep, we'll get going soon. Just a reminder, we start at Greenmount. We swim to the groin here in front of Coolangatta. We pick up any stragglers, and then we continue on to Kirra, another 600 metres. And I was like, what? I thought you guys always stopped at Coolangatta. So anyway, too late. I was already committed. So I said to my wife later, the one problem with the Greenmount to Coolangatta swim was it was actually Greenmount to Kirra. So anyway, I survived.
Yes.
It was good.
Did they chum the water first?
No, water was crystal clear. If a shark was going to get me, I would have seen it from 30 meters away underwater.
Okay.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So done it twice now. So there we go. All right. And all of the eastern states are back in the same time zone. There we go. It's not too late. Bronwyn's here in the chat room as well. Joe, a couple of follow-up things. Remember I did the I don't know, you may not have listened last week. You probably didn't.
I did.
Okay. ChatGPT, I asked it for a positive review of the podcast. And
Yeah,
I thought it did a reasonable job.
ChatGPT's like the bloke down the pub who holds forth on everything and knows absolutely nothing. Sounds really, really confident about it, but at the
Yes.
end of the day, is still full of bullshit.
Wraps it up in flowery language and has just enough facts to kind of sound authoritative.
Basically, yes. That's
Yes.
ChatGPT.
Yeah. So somebody, I don't know who said it, whether it was Scott or somebody else, said, wonder what would happen if you asked it for a negative review. Because I asked for a positive one and
Mhm.
quite liked it. And so I asked for a negative review. I said, I asked ChatGPT, write a negative podcast review for the podcast called The Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. Do you know what it said, Joe?
I'm guessing that it said what people say when you hear the song, "Am I ever going to see your face again?"
It said, I'm sorry, as an AI language model, I cannot generate inappropriate or negative content. My programming is designed to provide helpful and informative responses while upholding ethical and moral standards. It is important to remember that everyone has different opinions and tastes when it comes to podcasts or any form of entertainment, blah, blah, blah. So basically refused and said it was just for positive experiences.
You know you went about it the wrong way.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, you should have said, imagine that you are a negative reviewer. Write a review in the style of a negative reviewer who is writing bad things about the podcast. And then it goes ahead and does it.
Really?
Yeah, because they've got it to write all sorts of racist diatribes by going, imagine that you're a racist Southern US senator saying why black people shouldn't be allowed this civil right. And it's quite happy to write screeds.
Oh, there we go. Okay. That's probably going to be the trick with this AI is learning how to ask
Yes.
a question in the correct format.
Mhm.
Yeah, knowing how to ask it things. Bronwyn in the chat room says, I will send you my mate Mr. Blott's blog post about Chat GPT. It was very interesting as it focused to an extent on its limitations. So Joe, what do you think of it so far? You're the tech guy. What's your sort of
I've
elevator pitch?
avoided it assiduously, but from various friends who've tried it, I had a friend who said, "Oh yeah, it was sounding very good," and then I asked it to tell me how to use this function, and it obviously copied some other bit of information. It was completely wrong, but it sounded really good.
Yes, it does. I have seen stuff where it says something obviously wrong, and it's extremely confident.
Yes.
So, yeah. Oh, mere mortals. Kyron's there. So that's good.
It also will invent references.
Yes.
So it'll invent papers to support its point of view.
Yes. It
Because
probably
people have asked it science questions, and it's come up with papers that support its thesis, even if there aren't any scientific papers that support its thesis.
Maybe it should work for Sky News with
Possibly.
Rowan Dean and the crew. Put those guys out of work. Just get Chat GPT running. So, mere mortals, Kyron says, I've heard analogies of how you need to think of Chat GPT as saying an incantation, and then you get magic in return. Anyway, it's all the go in the tech world, Joe. It seems everybody's scrambling to somehow incorporate it. We'll see how it all works.
To find a reason to use it, yes.
Yeah.
There was something else a few years ago that they were all desperately trying to fit in, and there was no technical reason for it, but it was the latest shiny and great. And everyone was scrambling about how to incorporate this into their software.
There we go. Could be that. We'll see how it goes. On Twitter, Joe, there was a bit of a uproar about kids working in a cafe in a rural town. This cafe was going gangbusters, making preserves and jams and stuff like that. And kids as young as 11 and 12 were working in this cafe, and people were sort of carrying on about slave child labor, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, these kids are getting paid the award wage. And apparently in New South Wales, there's no minimum working age, and children aged 12 and under can get a tax file number if a parent or guardian signs on their behalf. So it seems like there is no
legal.
Yeah. And I mean, you do have, for example, kids who are actors on television commercials and things like that. So, and babies even would appear in some commercials. So presumably they have a tax file number and income.
I've known children of parents who own retail outlets, usually cafes,
Mm.
who have toiled away in the kitchen.
And get paid by their parents, or just
No, I think
genuinely slave labour?
slave
their
labour.
parents? Yes.
board
that
and
would
keep.
happen. Yes. Yeah. Did you have what was your first job as a kid? Did you have one?
I used to backfill my brother at the local servo from time to time
Right.
when he couldn't make his Saturday shift.
And how old were you?
I was a year older than him,
Yes.
so I don't know, 14 or 15 probably.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
But that was because that was still when you had petrol pump attendants.
Mm.
So we were actually filling cars up.
Yeah. I used to sell papers at a pub, a Hamilton pub, and a little
Yep.
bit at the Breakfast Creek Hotel. And so head down there on a Saturday and sell newspapers, wander around the pub, and get tips. It was all right. Good way to make money. Then as a kid at McDonald's from when I was about 15. So anyway.
I've also done some farm work, holiday jobs.
Yes.
God, that's backbreaking. I would never
Right.
want to be a farm worker.
There you go. Turned you off farm working.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, good skills. I reckon today, even when I cook, I still cook like a clean as you go because it was ingrained in me in McDonald's. So
I'm sure.
pots and pans go straight in the dishwasher or are wiped, or the bench is wiped down. I definitely today, that has ingrained in me from all those years flipping hamburgers at Macca's. So anyway, that was going on there. Joe, still we're going to be on a few lighthearted things. Just one final lighthearted one, maybe, before we get on to the crazy Dalai Lama. But there was a performance of The Bodyguard at a theatre, and some women in the theatre decided they could sing I Will Always Love You as well as the person paid to do it. So
Dolly Parton?
well, no, it's supposed to be like Whitney Houston, isn't it? It sings it in The Bodyguard.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll just listen carefully, dear listener, and you'll hear the obviously good voice of the person singing, and then in the background, this wailing in the crowd. Here we go.
Somebody was
Anyway.
torturing a cat, weren't they?
It was. There was a couple of Karens. They refused to leave. Like, they stopped the performance, and security had to drag these middle-aged women kicking and screaming out of this concert performance. They just refused to leave. And of course, the crowd burst into applause
As they
were
got
flogged.
kicked out?
Yeah,
Yes.
physically grabbed by these security guys and dragged out. So, there are some events where it might be appropriate to sing, like certain concerts and at certain times, maybe, but not in a theatre.
Unless, of course, you're the Governor General's wife.
Yes, that's right. I'm not allowed to poke fun at the Governor General's wife. Paul from Canberra thought that was not
Okay.
poor taste, but anyway. Still poking fun or poking tongues. The Dalai Lama, he was with this young kid, and it was a pretty amazing scene where obviously he meets all sorts of kids, and this one, he's got this kid in front of him, and I'll just play the clip now so you can see what he does.
Edsa, my tongue.
Yikes. The
So
Dalai
long-
Lama is
Long tradition of religious leaders and young boys.
yeah.
Just most of them aren't that obvious.
Yeah. And this is the statement that he sent. He put out his official Twitter statement. A video clip has been circulating that shows a recent meeting when a young boy asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama if he could give him a hug. His Holiness wishes to apologise to the boy and his family, as well as his many friends across the world, for the hurt his words may have caused. His Holiness often teases people he meets in an innocent and playful way, even in public and before cameras. He regrets the incident. It just goes to show, Joe, you put these guys, whether they're a Catholic priest or a Dalai Lama, in really weird lifestyles.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? They end up doing really weird shit and not knowing how weird it is, what they're getting up to.
Yeah.
You know, even the most best intentioned people eventually would lose grasp of reality and the norms of life living the lifestyles they do. This is the-
Friends who are school teachers, primary school teachers, have said
Mm,
you can't hug kids. You can allow them to hug you, but you're not allowed to hug them back. You're not
Right.
allowed to comfort them physically. Yeah, if they fall over in the playground, you can't give them a hug.
mm,
You know, there are all these rules about propriety,
yes.
about being seen.
Mm.
And you'd think someone would be saying to the Dalai Lama,
Well, His Holiness knows everything. So when you've reached the top like he has, nobody tells you anything. And people are giggling and laughing as he's performing. That was the other weird part about this, was just the rest of the crowd found it highly amusing. The poor kid will be traumatized for life. So anyway, just on religious people behaving badly, continued. Brian Houston.
never happens.
No. Brian Houston was blackout drunk, pulled over by police in California. He's alleged to have recorded a blood alcohol reading of 0.23, almost 5 times Australia's legal limit.
That's nothing.
Another fine example. And of course, Scott Morrison's favourite, and referred to by Scott Morrison in his maiden speech about what a guiding light Brian Houston was for him.
Yeah.
Joe, Soldiers of God.
Yeah, I think it was recently. It was a couple of months ago that
What was?
Brian Houston got called over.
Yeah, that drink driving incident was sometime in the last month or so.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah, it's only a recent one. So
Yeah, Shailene was asking.
yeah. Oh, hello, Shane. Good to see you there. Soldiers of God. I had this one sitting for a while. So there's a religious rights group called Christian Lives Matter.
But of course they do.
Yes. Obviously taking their name from Black
Black
Lives Matter.
Lives Matter. Yes.
So born in Strathfield office in 2017, when the marriage equality vote prompted a group of conservative Catholics, many of them from the Maronite Church, to unite over fears that children would be corrupted by LGBTQ stuff agenda in the mainstream. And so this group of Christian Lives Matter with a
You mean
Maronite.
they may discover that they're not the only people who are gay, and that other people may be gay the same as them. Yes.
Yes. They resolved to stay united, stay strong, pray, and just be aware. And 6 years later, the group has 18,000 Instagram followers, its own merchandise, and a growing public profile. Not bad
Yeah.
for 6
How
years.
many of those are from the US, the Instagram followers?
Yeah. Karen in the chat room, we're in the wrong game, mate, this podcasting. I can barely get 400 listeners. These guys will get 18,000 and they're selling merch left, right and centre. We are in the wrong game. So they're powered by anger over mainstream attitudes to faith. And they're a very militant group, this one. So this is another sort of offshoot or another category of Christian that we have to deal with now. I mean, we've got your typical conservative Catholics and Anglicans. We've got your crazy Anglicans in Sydney. We've got your evangelicals muscling in on politics. And now we've got this sort of Maronite flavoured bunch of thugs who are
Marmite flavoured.
Maronite, yeah, Marmite flavoured and Maronite flavoured. That's it, Joe. bunch of thugs who were going around trying to beat people up. And so one faction wears T-shirts branded with a cross and the words "Defenders of the Faith." Another group faction called itself Militus Dei, the Latin term for soldiers of God. And tension boiled over into violence on a Tuesday night when a group of pro-trans protesters were attacked outside St Michael's Church in the southwest suburb of Belfield. The church at the time was hosting a speech by that conciliatory figure, One Nation leader, Mark Latham.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the sort of people that want speaking to them. And police had to take the shocked and bruised protesters a few blocks away to catch taxis. And as they waited, religious activists drove past, filming themselves, shouting out of their car windows, saying, "Fuck all back to Newtown and don't come back to this area, you grubs." So another lovely group of Christians. And if you think I'm exaggerating,
God is love, don't you remember?
yes, it's all like the Crusades, isn't it? So here's a bit of footage for those watching of how that all transpired. I'm all for people finding community, Joe.
I'm surprised. Maronite is Lebanese?
I think that the Lebanese has a strong Maronite.
I was going to say
yes.
It's not often that the Lebanese and One Nation are in alignment.
Yes. Well, yes. I don't know. Is One Nation okay with Italians and Greek and sort of Europeanish sort of brown people, but just not those Islamic or people? It's hard.
Who knows?
It's hard to work your way through the One Nation cesspool as to what they are, which people are okay with them. But yeah, there we go. Mark Latham. And that's another group we've got to keep an eye on, is these guys who want to beat people up. We don't need that. We're zooming all over the world on this one, dear listener. It's going to be hard to find a theme on this one, but I'll do my best. Joe, Donald Trump.
Yes.
Some of the stuff is...
finally charged.
Yes. And... really, his tactic, of course, with all these things has been to delay and to push things back as far as possible. But eventually, it runs out of options. And this is him appearing in court the other day in New York. And I just love the entrance and how the court officials walk in, and you'll see how Donald Trump, basically the door's nearly slammed in his face. He has to open his own door, which he's not used to doing. Here we go.
President Trump, will you come speak to...
He didn't look happy, but he'd be so used to people sort of fawning over him, opening his doors, and that bailiff just walked in and paid him no attention. He had to open the door himself. Interesting to see what happens with him. Still on America, there's another shooting, Joe. I mean, of course there was another shooting. There'll be one going on right now.
Exactly, every 5 minutes, I think.
There'll be one going on right now. This one was a little bit unique, maybe. Two drivers in Florida, so it's Florida to start with. Two drivers started firing their guns at each other in a fit of road rage for no reason. One man had his 5-year-old in his car, and the other one had a 14-year-old. Both of the children got shot, just like our forefathers intended when they wrote the Constitution.
Sounds fair to me.
as this Twitter person says. And apparently, charges were dropped against the guy who shot the 5-year-old because of the stand your ground law, even though he also shot into a car full of people. So one guy already charges dropped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A friend from Florida said Florida is no worse than the other states, but it seems that way because the press have easy access to the police blotter.
Oh, okay. No,
So
there you go.
it's just it's more widely reported in Florida, and that's why people have the impression.
Do you think that's the case?
No, I think there are also a bunch of religious crazies that moved down to Florida for the sunshine.
Yes, I think that's the case. I don't know if we've talked about organ donation at different times, but there's a story about prisoners donating organs. And
Mhm.
in January of this year, 2 Democratic representatives proposed a bill that would offer prisoners in Massachusetts a new way to win reduction in their sentences by donating their bone marrow or vital organs.
Nothing wrong with that.
No. Recently, however, these two have walked back their proposal and are planning to introduce a version without the promise of a sentence reduction. Gee, I wonder
So,
why
of course,
someone would.
Prisoners are going to be falling over themselves after that.
That's right. So you mean I can donate an organ and I won't get a reduction in my sentence? Yeah. So, but Joe,
You do get to stay in the prison hospital for a few months.
you get to eat better food, probably.
Yep.
So these two are not the first state officials to propose turning to prisoners to help with organ supply problems in recent years. And I like this. This is the whole reason I wanted to tell this story, Joe, was this final paragraph was some of the cases are quite unusual. For example, back in 2010, Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour suspended the life sentences of 2 sisters, Gladys and Jamie Scott, on the condition that Gladys donate one of her kidneys to Jamie. And the reason is her dialysis treatment was costing the state almost $200,000 per year, and Barbour wanted to save money by facilitating the organ donation.
Well, if you want to save money, you just let the prisoners go because
He obviously couldn't get away with that one. He couldn't turn off the dialysis. So,
oh no, I mean just release them.
oh yeah.
If the prisoners aren't in your care, then they're not your responsibility. You don't have to pay the guards. You don't have to pay food.
Yeah. So yeah, that's that one. Is people still in the chat room, or is this gone?
No, there are people there.
Okay.
You heard about the US and the abortion medication?
No.
So a Texas federal judge, has just made a ruling which is pending for 7 days that the FDA overreached when they approved
An abortion drug.
RU486, basically,
Yep.
for abortions, saying that they didn't have the remit. It wasn't in their remits to approve the drug, and therefore the drug shouldn't be allowed to be sold in the States.
Mm.
However, another federal court judge in a different jurisdiction has said that it would be illegal for the FDA not to approve the drug. Completely separate decisions and probably completely independently reached, but these 2 completely incompatible decisions came down at around the same time.
Mm.
And I was watching a US lawyer who is very, I would say he's right-leaning. He certainly was happy with Roe v. Wade being overturned.
Mhm.
And he said that he'd read this judge's ruling
Mm.
and said it was motivated reasoning. He said he'd come to the decision and then had strung together a bunch of very, very tenuous thoughts to try and justify his decision.
No surprise there.
But it was interesting to see this obviously right-wing guy
Mm.
saying, yeah, there's no legal grounds for this.
Right. Even he had thought that this had crossed a line of
Basically.
legal reasoning. Yeah.
Yes. Unfortunately, if it gets bumped up to the Supreme Court, there's a very good chance that the Supreme Court will ban the drug.
In Texas.
No, across the US.
Oh,
If it's a Supreme
okay.
Court ruling, it would be
Of course. Yes. But then it would, that would mean though that the drug's banned. Even if a state wanted to enable people to have the drug, it might
It wouldn't
stop
be
them.
approved by the FDA. Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, okay. Looks like we've got trouble, Joe, with the feed on
Oh.
Facebook dropping out. So sorry about that. Not sure why that would be the case, but we'll persevere. Maybe head over to YouTube and see if it's any better. But
Yeah, I mean, everything seems fine from our end. I'll have a quick look.
yeah. All right. Joe, the tech guy, will get onto that. Meanwhile, as you know, dear listener, I am fascinated with currency and with money. And really, the more I read, the more I'm thinking that so much of traditional economics has got it wrong. And so there's guys like Stephen Keen and Michael Hudson and other economists who are looking at the classical economics and saying these guys have got it completely wrong. So, and as part of that, we're moving towards a state where China's becoming more powerful. It's creating alliances with the Saudis, with the French, we'll talk about soon, with Iran, with a whole bunch of others. American power is slipping, and the world is moving to a regime where they no longer need to use the US dollar as the currency for international transactions. So, with that in mind, have a listen to Marco Rubio, because America, when things are in US dollars, can exercise power anywhere in the world because it's US dollars, their dollars. But when they're not US dollars, their ability to sanction groups disappears. So here's Marco Rubio on a Fox News thing.
Today, Brazil, in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction.
There we go. He sees the writing on the wall. Poor America won't be able to sanction people anymore because things won't be done in US dollars. That's where we're heading to. Now, look, I've got something here that I normally would have put up on the screen. But dear listener, if you are listening to this podcast on a podcast app, we've got chapters, and the chapters have pictures. So if you look at your app at the moment, you hopefully will see a couple of graphs show up. And one of them is showing the revenue of Australian oil and gas sector, and then the share that the Australian government gets out of that. And then it's a comparison to the Norwegian oil and gas. And dear listener, it is chalk and cheese. Actually, maybe I can put this up on the screen. Let me just try and add. Joe, how do I share a
Should be able
screen? Share
click on
screen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just see this one. Window. That one. Share. There we go. So on the left, the dark blue, Australian industries, oil and gas sector revenue, and the orange is what the government gets. And on the right, Norwegian oil and gas sector revenue. And the orange is the share that the Norwegian government gets. So you can see it's absolutely chalk and cheese. We are not getting enough tax and royalties from what these groups are selling compared to what, say, the Norwegians are getting. And, of course, if we propose to increase these royalties or taxes, the industry groups would say, it's impossible. We can't afford it. Nobody will ever do business with you guys. But you've only got to look at the Norwegians to see that they actually will. And here is a Norwegian politician talking about their experience. So I'll just play this guy.
But I think that we can inspire each other and that we can learn from each other. So what I can do is to tell what Norway did and what Norway is doing. And then people, politicians in other countries have to look if there are anything they can learn from us. And then just then to answer, what we have done in Norway is to say that the natural resources in the ground, that's something we own in common. It's not private ownership. So the oil and gas in the continental shelf is the ownership of the Norwegian state by law. But then we invite foreign companies to invest, to produce, and then of course they can sell the oil and gas. But partly we tax them quite heavily. It's 78% tax rate. And they told us that was impossible. But they come and invest. And we tax them, and they stay. Because they earn money even with a tax rate of 78%. Second, large part of the Norwegian oil and gas is also not managed by the oil and gas companies, but actually directly owned by the Norwegian state. So we have two sources of revenue, partly by taxing the companies, but also partly by direct ownership. But just to add one more thing is that even if you have this strong state ownership to the resources, we have a very competitive oil and gas sector. We have many foreign companies, and we are very much looking for competition. So we believe in the market, we believe in the competition, we believe in the open economy, but we believe that the extra rent, the connected to natural resources, shall be something which is in the common ownership of the people of Norway, and that's why we have the strong state participation.
The thing that gets me, Joe, is we have these experiments that are running, that are proving that things can be done, and still people talk as if it's impossible.
Well, like places where private schools are not legal.
Yes. And, you know,
and places where they don't get any government funding.
Yeah. And even from the Americans' point of view with their gun laws, and they can look at a place like Australia and, you know, we had some, you know, shootings, changed the laws, none. And just at various different things now, you can look around the world and see examples of where a change in policy is possible and does work and still gets denied. And, you know, the problem is, do we see any discussion of this in Australia at all? Like, these are the major topics that should be discussed, and
no, because the politicians are funded by the oil and gas companies.
Yes, and the media, like Murdoch, whatever, is supporting them as well. And still, why isn't
You've seen the photo that says this is what foreign interference looks like, and there's a picture of Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah, yep.
And apparently he's no longer engaged.
Yes. Yeah.
A rumor on the grapevine is that she was too much of a religious nutter for him.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is interesting because initially they said, oh, she shares we share a strong religious bond or something.
Yes. Who knows? I don't even think about it. I don't want to think about it, but yeah, she's gone. Didn't last long. Now, the other interesting thing happening is China and France. So, Macron went to China and had discussions with
Winnie the Pooh?
With Winnie the Pooh, indeed. And simultaneously, there was some stuff to do with airplanes that we'll talk about. But basically, after the event, Macron was in an aeroplane speaking with Politico and two French journalists after he spent 6 hours with the Chinese president. And Macron was talking to these journalists on the record about stuff. And he said, quote, the paradox would be that, overcome with panic, we believe we are just America's followers, Macron said in the interview. The question Europeans need to answer, is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the US agenda and a Chinese overreaction. So he said, Europeans cannot resolve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we credibly say on Taiwan, watch out, if you do something wrong, we'll be there? If you want to increase tensions, that's the way to do it. So apparently, yeah, on the record, he was saying stuff
A bunch
to try
of cheese-eating surrender monkeys.
Yes, he was trying to hose down the ideas that France should get involved and that the rest of the world should get involved in a potential conflict over Taiwan. And apparently, off the record, he said even further things along those lines. So he was saying stuff that Xi would have liked to hear. And simultaneously, Joe, so
Paris is on fire?
that, but also Airbus is the French aeroplane manufacturing Airbus.
Yes.
And Boeing is the US, based airplane manufacturer, the two sort of dominant plane manufacturing businesses in the world. Airbus, French, Boeing, US. And Airbus has announced it's going to launch a second assembly line in a China factory as part of trade and tech deals between Beijing and Paris. And the decision will double production capacity at the company's Chinese plant. So Airbus increasing airplane manufacture in its factory in China. And so it's going to deepen that. Separately also, China agreed to buy 160 Airbus commercial aircraft, including 150 A320s and 10 A350s. So there was that. And Beijing played up the prospects of bilateral economic cooperation. Both sides will deepen cooperation in aviation, aerospace, and civilian nuclear power, which are our traditional areas of cooperation. We will cultivate new cooperation and new growth pillars in green development and innovation. Blah, blah. And he also said China, this is Xi, said China would increase imports of French agricultural products and called on both countries to offer fair, just, and non-discriminatory business climate for each other's companies. So, Joe, France is breaking away from the US.
It's not the first time.
Side, and China is saying, good on you, France. Here's a deal on some aeroplanes. And it's just going to create cracks in the sort of Western alliance. And finally, countries like France and Germany are going to go, we need our industries to go ahead. And being America's buddy isn't helping us. And China's going to cut deals and help drive this wedge and isolate America through these sorts of economic deals. That's how I see it.
Well, they jumped out of NATO. They've only just rejoined NATO in the last 10 years, was it?
Did they? Okay.
Yeah. Jumped out in the 60s from memory.
Yep. So, by the way, China's civil aviation market is the second largest in the world. It's been dominated by Airbus and Boeing. However, the Chinese are now making a C919, a narrow-bodied passenger jet that can compete with the Boeing 737 and the Airbus A320. So they're just gaining expertise, learning from the French. How do we make an airplane? And then all the engineers and tech guys who are working on that, those skills will be able to be transferred to Chinese.
Then we'll have Great Wall aeroplanes.
Indeed we will. Yep. So indeed we will. And Now, I just want to get on to my next part here, and this is the next good thing that I can share this screen, Joe, if it will let me. Okay. So this screen, dear listener, is because I've been talking for a while about how America doesn't make anything anymore that Russia or China or any of these guys need because they've deindustrialized. They don't make stuff anymore. It's just finance, agriculture. And I forgot that really the last sort of remaining things that Americans make are, besides weapons, bombs, military stuff, are cars and the Boeing airplanes. And this graph on the screen, or the graph that you're looking at on your iPhone or whatever you're listening to this podcast with, because the chapters have images, shows share of Saudi Arabia's capital goods and metal imports. So the blue is what it used to import, or what it imports from America. The red is what it, red and orange and sort of shades of red, what it's importing from China. And as you can see at the very beginning of the graph, back in 1992, that dark blue, USA Transport, the light blue, USA Machinery. And both of those have shrunk dramatically. This is Saudi Arabia buying machinery and transport stuff from the US and had virtually nothing from China. And now, 30 years later, what you've got is buying from China metals, machinery, and transport, and it's overtaken what they used to get from America. So this is the sort of fundamentals of why, someone like Saudi Arabia is now going, well, we're buying all this stuff from China now. We're not actually buying the stuff from the USA. We are happy to deal in a currency of the Chinese yuan rather than US dollars because we need it to pay for stuff that we're getting from China. That's how the world's changing. It's too late for America. Their only hope is to create wars in the meantime to slow down the demise. Oh, dear. This guy, I did read one Twitter guy who said that this action by Airbus in creating an extra sort of factory output in China, he said that there's going to run a risk that the Americans will impose sanctions on Airbus. So we'll see what happens.
Stop US companies buying Airbus?
Yes. Stop Airbuses from landing. Stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. All sorts of things. So be interesting to see if that happens. You heard it here
Of
first.
course, Concorde was clobbered heavily by the US.
What did the US do to it?
So when Concorde was first released, the lucrative route is between JFK, so New York, to Los Angeles.
Right.
And they banned supersonic overflight of the United States.
Right.
So continental flights had to be subsonic, which basically meant that that Concorde couldn't fly New York to Los Angeles.
Right.
And there were all sorts of scare stories in the press around that time about how supersonic booms were going to cause cows to have abortions and windows to break, and that's why they couldn't possibly allow it over the continent. It only had to be transatlantic.
And Concorde had been banking on being able to do that sort of transcontinental flight.
Yep.
Right. And that ruined their business model.
That was the real moneymaker for them. So they
There
were
we
stuck
go.
with the New York to London and New York to Paris.
There you go. Not surprised, Joe. Look, it's going to be a quick one, dear listener. We're not going to go too much longer. But, Joe, often you see, I've in this podcast in the last 8 years, have looked at happiness indexes. And invariably, who were the happiest people?
The Bhutanese.
The Finns. So that's who's always sort of top of the table for the happiness index in the last 7 or 8 years. But
You didn't know that the Bhutanese don't measure GDP, but they measure national happiness.
I didn't. No.
Yeah.
Okay. And do they measure themselves as being happier than any other country?
I don't know, but
Right.
they measure their country's progress about how happy everybody is.
Right. Well, it's probably a better number than the GDP, as we've discussed on many times.
Yes.
You know, like America's GDP is inflated because of their outrageous medical health scheme is so
Yeah.
expensive, and that actually improves their GDP figures. So, yeah, and you know, when a levee bank breaks in New Orleans and completely floods a city, that's actually good for GDP. Stuff like that. It's just an insane metric to be using. Anyway,
Yeah.
when we've been looking at the happiness index in previous years that Finland always comes out on top of, they don't actually measure happiness per se. What they're doing is they're looking at things like GDP per capita plus housing ownership rates plus other economic indicators and saying, oh, well, if your GDP is so high and everyone owns a house and your education level is high, blah, blah, blah,
Then people must be happy.
you must be happy. Yes, exactly. And so anyway, a survey was done by Ipsos, and they actually went around the world and asked people, are you happy? In, questions to do with satisfaction in life and happiness and things like that. Taking all these things together, various factors, would you say that you are very happy, rather happy, not very happy, or not happy at all? And very big survey. And, well, dear listener, one guess, who came out on top? Wasn't Finland.
No.
China came out on top, then Saudi Arabia, then the Netherlands, India, Brazil, United Arab Emirates, Mexico, Colombia, Australia.
But Saudi Arabia, they only asked the men who were natives who...
I don't know the details. I don't know. But my point is, it just goes to show we've got to dig deeper into these surveys, all these things, and say, well, hang on a minute, what were you really measuring? Because you're right,
Yeah.
Joe. If you ask the immigrant population, the Filipino itinerant workers in Saudi Arabia, are you happy?
Yes.
It's hard to imagine that they were happiest in the world.
It's like if you compare the number of rapes that happen in Saudi Arabia compared to the number that happen in Sweden. I'm sure Sweden has the higher rape rate.
Yes.
But that's because in Saudi Arabia, you have to have 2 male witnesses. Otherwise, it's just premarital sex. And
Yes.
the woman gets punished.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's got to take all these things with a grain of salt. Right. What else have I got here that I can do without getting into too much trouble?
Did you see the picture I sent you just before the podcast started?
No, I was busy wrangling grandchildren
Okay.
at the time. It mightn't have sounded like it at the beginning of the podcast.
Somebody has put a number of Republican faces into one of the AI drawing programs and then told it to imagine them as drag queens
Oh, right. Okay.
after the drag queen acts that are being passed recently.
Right. Okay.
So I shared with you a picture of
Mhm.
Mike Pence in a tutu.
Oh, thank you for that. No, I didn't. You shared it with me. That's going to be tough. Hang on, Mike Pence in a tutu. Hang on a second. That would be in. Is that going to be in
Facebook
Messenger? Is it?
Messenger, yes.
Okay. Hang on a second. All right. Let me just quickly Facebook Messenger. Mike Pence. It's going to be worth it, Joe.
Oh, yeah. Apparently,
Okay,
there's a
that's
number of
pretty cool.
these.
Right. And the trick was to get. If you'd have just simply asked
No,
the
I think
artificial intelligence to do it.
so. It was
Ah.
the before ChatGPT was the latest thing, it was Picasso or something.
Right.
That's not the one, but
No. Why isn't that share screen? Hang on a second. Why isn't that sharing?
yes, I think you just go.
I got to go to the right window. Here we go.
There we
Okay,
go.
There we go. Right. Apparently, Mike Pence was being told he had to testify in relation to Donald Trump with January 6th, and he decided not to appeal. So he's quite more or less happy to testify. So,
Given Trump's,
treatment of him?
I was going to say, urging of the lynch mob on January the 6th, I'm not surprised.
Yes. Yep. So, okay, take that off.
Yep.
I'm not. Well, yeah, I don't know. He seems the way he was treated, but he still seemed quite friendly to Donald Trump. Anyway, we'll see how all that pans out. Right, dear listener, given the circumstances, it's going to be a quick one. We're going to finish off now. Landon Hardbottom did send a message at the last minute, but given my limited technical abilities in this makeshift studio, couldn't get it up and running.
So we're not going to get banned from YouTube?
No. So next week you will have Landon's response to us being struck off YouTube on one episode. So we'll have that, and I think Scott will have recovered from his Hong Kong trip, so he'll be back, and we'll talk about a bunch of other things. So it's a quick one this week, but thank you in the chat room for all of your comments. Talk to you next week. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from him.